I was raised in a good family. We had a lot of relatives and friends in our family, and until I got old enough to go into service, we never was even thought about God, or Sunday was just like a Saturday, and we used to have a good time. Some of our relatives would come over and stay all night, and I never thought about God or the Bible and that. But when I got into the service, I tried to get into service during the wars. Every time I turned around, from the time I was 16, and I kept trying to enlist until I finally got in the Army. But all those, growing up when I was a kid, I never thought about anything about God or anything. It was just our family and the security we had in our family, because my dad was a good man, a working man, and he always took care of the family. But when I got into the service and went overseas, and I got away from all the security and our relatives, our family that I knew, and things were happening around me that made me start thinking about dying, and before I never thought about it. And when I got to the point where I started thinking about dying, if something happened to me, that I kept thinking, where would I go if I died? I wasn't sure, because I didn't know anything about the Bible or anything. And I can remember on a Sunday, about 11 o'clock, just before we were getting ready to eat, and I stood over a Japanese boy about my age without him. He was dying. He didn't have no legs. Had his legs off. He was bleeding. They were trying to save him. And it scared me so bad and made me sick to my stomach. And I remember that for days after, I couldn't sleep at night. I kept thinking about dying and that before I never even thought about it. And from that point, I kept thinking about, I got to go to church, even though that we didn't have churches like they do now. We had services outside, and but I started going to the church, and when they'd have church service for the servicemen, and I started going to a Protestant service, but I couldn't find anything. I heard him tell stories, but nothing ever seemed that I could grasp on to. And I can remember back before I went overseas, when I was stationed in Little Rock, Arkansas. I don't know why, but I was with some guys, and we went to a church on a Sunday night. And I remember that they were preaching about being saved, and I remember that the man even came down the aisle to where us soldiers were sitting, and we made fun of him, laughing. I never even heard what he was saying. I didn't even understand what he was saying. But I remember him talking about being saved and that. And that's about the only time I ever heard it until I came back home from overseas. But I know I started going to this Protestant, but like I said, when I was overseas, these services didn't have nothing, and a couple of my friends were Catholics. And so they got me to go to Catholic service. And it seemed to me like this Catholic service was so religious that the men were on their knees praying and all that, and that kind of impressed me. It made me feel better than that Protestant church service because it was so cold. And I got to know the priest, and before you know it, he wanted me to come to catechism as much as we had time for, because they didn't have it like they do over in the States. And so I become a Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. And then when I came home from service, before I came home, I started writing letters to my family, my mother and them, about going to church, wanting them to go to church and all those. And I remember when I came home that it seemed like a miracle happened in my family, that my father was saved and he was waiting for me to come home so he could be baptized. And I remember right after I came home that him and my Uncle Coffee both were baptized. as a witness. They witnessed to me. And I know that our Pastor Hardy came to our house one day, and I knew that I wasn't saved. I knew that something I needed. I wasn't satisfied just being religious. And when he came in the house, and him and I went in a room by ourselves, and he showed me the Bible about being saved. And I remember one verse that, of all the verses he showed me, that in Romans 10:13 it says, "Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." I've never forgotten it. I know that when I become a Christian, I had a problem growing because I was around people that claimed to be Christians in our church that weren't the kind of example. And instead of looking for the Lord and growing in other ways, I was looking at men, and they failed me. And sometimes I would get so disgusted about going to church that sometimes I would stay away for a while until I get under so much conviction that I would come back to church. And it just took a lot of years before I really started growing in the Lord. And I wasted so much of my younger life as a Christian, not growing and being the kind of Christian I should be. But I'm thankful that I come to a place in my life where I really trusted, that Christ is the answer in my life. And I know that I'm not perfect, and I've failed Christ so many times in my Christian life. But like we always say, I failed him, but Christ has never failed me. And I'm just praying and thankful that for my children, that I know that my children have all said they've come to know the Lord. And I'm just praying that a couple of them will really not only say it, but live it the way they should.